Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Sophia Bush, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today at the final session of Essential for Recovery, the first Global Essential Workers Summit. Over the past 2 days, we've seen proof of the effectiveness of collective action and of the importance of eliminating gender inequities. But at the heart of it all is power. Workers have shown us that they will no longer wait for top-down decisions that put their livelihoods at risk and leave them vulnerable when the next global crisis inevitably hits. It comes back to the 4 fundamental needs that all workers have: fair wages and working conditions, safe workplaces and access to healthcare, social protection benefits, and freedom from harassment and violence in the workplace. To guarantee that they are never again deprived of these basic human rights, they can no longer be sidelined. They need and they must have a seat at the table. And here's how they can get one.
Hi, I'm Lisa Napoli, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with Joanna Szustakowska, a care worker in a nursing home in Poland and a member of a young and growing trade union under the umbrella of Uni Global. Joanna, you were truly on the front lines when COVID hit and in the subsequent waves, and you estimated that about a third of the staff at your nursing home contracted COVID at some point, and about 90 of 117 residents. Management didn't provide any proper PPE, nor did they set any protocols for health and safety or compensate workers for all the extra hours in dangerous conditions away from your own families. And finally, in December, you were forced into lockdown at the home.
To się zdarzyło wszystko na początku grudnia, bodajże 7 grudnia. Część pracowników została po prostu z dnia na dzień z przykazem od dyrektora placówki zatrzymanych w DPS-ie, że ich sanepid zamknął, co później się okazało zupełnie nieprawdą. Zostali przymuszeni, nie pozwolono im już wyjść do domu bez rzeczy swoich osobistych, bez kosmetyków, bez niczego. Ja byłam w tym czasie w domu, do mnie zadzwonił kierownik, czy zgadza się przyjść, pomóc w opiece nad pacjentami, nad mieszkańcami i żeby wspomóc załogę. Ja się zgodziłam, ale też nie wiedziałam, do czego idę, więc zostaliśmy nieprzygotowani w ogóle. Nie wiedzieliśmy, co nas czeka, nie wiedzieliśmy, ile pensjonariuszy jest chorych, gdzie są oddziały covidowe, kto jest covidowy. Nie testowano nas, więc nawet na dzień dzisiejszy, wychodząc z domu, ja też nie miałam wiedzy, czy ja jestem zdrowa, czy nie, a już wcześniej przecież przebywałam. Pracownicy, którzy zostali przymusowo tam zatrzymani, byli rozżaleni. Dlaczego? Dlaczego nie mogą wyjść do domu chociaż po rzeczy osobiste? Dyrekcja na nasze pytania odpowiedziała w sposób krzykiem, że to jest tak wręcz nasza wina, że przynieśliśmy COVID do DPS-u. I że tak naprawdę w tej chwili tylko mamy się zająć mieszkańcami. Pracownicy nie mieli nic, nie mieli nawet łóżka do spania, nie mieli własnej łazienki, nie mieli nic. Nic nie było przygotowane dla pracowników. Więc no, że tak powiem, zawarłyśmy szeregi. Zaczęłyśmy rozmawiać, komunikować się.
So it was because of the union that you were able to get the provisions that you needed. And even though you wound up being locked down for just several days, why was that victory so important?
Dlaczego ważne jest zwycięstwo? Przede wszystkim dlatego, że w końcu nas usłyszano, że zaczęli z nami rozmawiać, że usłyszało nas starostwo, dlatego, że zobaczyli, że to nie tak powinno wyglądać. My nie powinniśmy spać na materacach pod umywalką. My powinniśmy mieć dostęp do własnej łazienki. My się później cieszyłyśmy chociaż z tych 2 dni, dlatego że gdyby następna sytuacja miała taka miejsce, już nasze koleżanki miały lepiej. Już było zupełnie. Cieszyłyśmy się, że w końcu ktoś wysłuchał tych pracowników. Zobaczył, że to, że zostały złamane prawa człowieka tak naprawdę. I tylko dzięki związkom zawodowym udało się to. Bez związków zawodowych nas nikt nie chciał słuchać.
I'd imagine it would be very risky to stand up to management without the protection of the union and the safety in numbers of your colleagues and the union representation.
No, oczywiście, że tak. Był strach, dziewczyny się bały, zastanawiały się, czy mają się odezwać, czy nie. Czy bały się, co będzie za chwilę, czy nie stracą pracy, czy nie będą wzywane na dywanik, czy dyrekcja po tej całej sytuacji nie będzie ich zwalniała. Oczywiście, że tak, był strach, ale też dziewczyny wstępując w ogóle do związków zawodowych, powiedziały, że już mają dość bania się.
Do you have any messages for other care workers around the world who are in a similar situation to yours, who aren't getting the wages and the protections they deserve? What message would you say to them based on your experience?
Przede wszystkim, żeby ludzie przestali się bać, żeby się zjednoczyli, zawalczyli o siebie, bo jeżeli będą dbać o siebie, będą prawidłowo dbać o innych. Ludzie muszą zrozumieć, że pewne rzeczy im się po prostu należą, że związki to siła i jedność, i wartości. I to chcemy nauczyć też władzę, że jesteśmy ludźmi, których trzeba też słuchać.
Essential workers on the ground. Joanna, thank you. Stay safe. Thanks so much for speaking with us.
A ja dziękuję za wysłuchanie, że ktoś chce nas wysłuchać.
I stand with all the essential workers across the globe, fruit sellers, domestic workers, farm laborers, waste pickers, home-based garment workers. They deserve protection, respect, and dignity. Let's build forward.
There are 2.3 million domestic workers in Mexico and nearly 2.5 million here in the US. Most are a part of the informal economy, working without stable incomes or social protections. And now their lives have been devastated by the pandemic. But as we are about to hear, they do have networks and advocates. Up next, we'll hear from Ai-jen Poo, Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance in the US, and Norma Palacios Trabamala of the National Union of Domestic Workers in Mexico.
Hi, Norma. It's great to see you. How are you? My first question.
Hola, Angie, pues yo también muy contenta de volvernos a encontrar, aunque sea por este medio.
You're always working hard, and the work of your organization is such an inspiration to domestic workers in the United States. Are there specific policies that you are pushing for in Mexico that will make sure that domestic workers are protected and uplifted in our economic recovery?
Sí, sí, ahorita para nosotras el tema de la seguridad social es fundamental. Ahorita está en este proceso de que,
Yes.
de que se tiene que legislar para que ya pase, se reforme la ley del seguro social y sea ya de una manera obligatoria, y queremos que sea que las instancias que son responsables de esto, como los senadores y diputados, hagan su trabajo y que lo hagan bien. No queremos una seguridad social a medias, una seguridad social que llegue realmente a todas esas trabajadoras del hogar. Otro tema también para nosotras importante es fortalecer el tema de los contratos de trabajo y por último, pero no menos importante, el tema de los salarios justos y dignos, ¿no? Porque todo tiene que ir de la mano. Si no tenemos un contrato por escrito, pues no podemos tener esa formalidad que debiéramos, tener esas reglas claras de cómo debe de ser la relación de trabajo. Si no tenemos un salario justo y digno que realmente cubra las necesidades que que tenemos como mujeres, como trabajadoras del hogar, pues es incompleto, ¿no? Todo este reconocimiento de derechos que deberíamos de tener y que también pues va ligado 100% a la organización y que bueno, ahí también ustedes pues nos han dado un gran ejemplo, ¿no? Yo hace algunas semanas o meses vi que sacaron una carta de derechos y pues bueno, ahí también pues me gustaría que nos pudieras contar o comentar cómo ha sido este proceso, ¿no? Porque también teniendo este panorama en plena crisis de pandemia, ustedes la sacaron y eso para nosotras fue también súper impresionante cómo lograron eso y que para nosotras nos puede servir de ejemplo de cómo llevar aquí acciones en México.
Beautiful. Well, we are learning from you as well. And one of the things that was really key to us designing our National Bill of Rights for domestic workers in the United States was learning from our sisters in the International Domestic Workers Federation about how we can not only expand the protections, the social protections for domestic workers, but how we can build in mechanisms for enforcement to make sure that these laws can be implemented in the private home domestic work setting.
La resiliencia es importante, es fundamental para poder nosotras salir adelante de todas esas situaciones tan complicadas que vivimos y que una vez que vives todo este proceso ya nada te detiene, ¿no? Y que bueno, ahí puedo decir a nombre de mis compañeras y también del gran movimiento que es en Estados Unidos, que es lo que nos ha traído todos estos avances también, y que lo hacemos también pensando no solo en nosotras como trabajadoras del hogar en México y en Estados Unidos, sino a nivel mundial, ¿no? Que las trabajadoras del hogar somos mujeres muy poderosas, muy importantes, que contribuimos mucho a la sociedad y que lamentablemente a veces ni nosotras mismas tenemos el conocimiento de todo eso y que sí necesitamos desarrollar todas esas capacidades porque también venimos de contextos muy, muy difíciles, en el caso de México, de pobreza, de desigualdad, de falta de oportunidades, de falta de acceso a la educación, a también algo importante, que el trabajo del hogar todavía no se reconoce como trabajo, ¿no? Entonces también eso tiene un gran impacto en cómo va avanzando o deja de avanzar, pues todos los avances que podamos tener en cuanto a la legislación, en cuanto a los derechos, en cuanto a la firma de un contrato, en cuanto a un salario digno, en cuanto a seguridad social.
Absolutely. You reminded me of the meetings that we had at the beginning of the pandemic in the United States when domestic workers everybody was very scared because nobody knew, we didn't know much about the pandemic. And all of a sudden, everybody was staying at home and lost their jobs overnight, or for some of them who were taking care of the elderly, they were quarantining with the elderly patients, the clients that they take care of, and they were isolated there with the people that they care for, away from their families. And I remember a number of workers saying on those calls, this being a part of an organization and a community of workers is the one thing that's keeping me going right now. It's giving me strength. It's making me resilient. We have sister organizations all over the world, as Norma mentioned, and our movement is growing, and there are domestic workers organizing in every corner of this world, and it is really an inspiration. We inspire each other and we make each other resilient.
Total.
Right, Norma?
Sí, sin duda para nosotras la organización ha sido fundamental. Como también tú comentas, nosotras trabajamos en nuestros centros de trabajo, la mayoría del tiempo puede ser que estemos solas, y si están los empleadores, pues es una relación de mucha distancia. Pero también cuando tenemos el conocimiento de que existen otras compañeras u otras mujeres que son como tú, te identificas primero, es algo que enseguida te conecta, y eso Yo lo puedo expresar de manera personal. Cuando yo conocí a otras mujeres que eran trabajadoras del hogar como yo, en ese momento yo no me reconocía como esa mujer trabajadora del hogar. Para mí fue algo que me fortaleció mucho, que me motivó a seguir adelante y que bueno, también esto te trae momentos de, a veces también como de mucha reflexión acerca de lo que tenemos que hacer y cómo vas escuchando muchas historias a lo largo de México, de las situaciones que están llevando. La organización sin duda es poder, la organización sin duda es conocimiento, es autocuidado, es colectividad, es resiliencia. La resiliencia es importante, es fundamental para poder nosotras salir adelante de todas esas situaciones tan complicadas que vivimos.
Beautiful. It's so powerful, Norma. I just want to say thank you for your leadership, your hard work. I want to send our compañeras in Mexico all our love and solidarity. We wish you all the best as you continue to fight, and we know you're going to win, and we can't wait to celebrate more victories with you. Thank you.
Então, Maria, me diz primeiro, como que você arranjou seu apelido, Maria dos Camelôs?
Então, quando eu comecei na militância, né, na rua, em 2003, os próprios camelôs começaram a me chamar de Maria dos Camelôs. Isso aí acabou colando, né?
Vamos dar um zoom para os dias de hoje, ou melhor, no início do ano passado, quando chegou a pandemia, você estava trabalhando?
Sim, sim. Meu último dia de trabalho foi dia 16 de março, né? Foi o último dia que eu montei minha barraca e a pandemia começou. Dali a gente não pôde mais voltar para a rua.
E nesse momento, quando você percebeu que não dava para voltar para a rua, o que você pensou?
Então, eu comecei a tentar fazer campanha de arrecadação para a gente ajudar as pessoas, né? Porque muitas pessoas trabalham de manhã para comer à noite. Então, assim, as pessoas vão ficar paradas sem ter o que comer. Então, a primeira coisa que a gente fez foi uma vaquinha que em uma semana a gente conseguiu arrecadar 28 mil reais e esse dinheiro a gente fez depósito na conta das pessoas.
Então, você, como trabalhadora de rua, estava basicamente dependendo de doação, né, para sobreviver.
Sim, sim. A gente dependeu de doação para sobreviver.
Então, para solucionar o problema do trabalhador informal, que veio muito antes da pandemia, o que precisa?
Eu acho que a gente precisa ter direitos, a gente precisa lutar por muitos direitos que a gente não tem, né? E o reconhecimento como trabalhador. Uma pessoa ali atrás de um tabuleiro, de uma barraca, ali tem um trabalhador, ali tem um pai ou uma mãe de família que todos os dias sai de casa e precisa levar o sustento para sua casa. A gente não pode ser enxergado como marginal, né? Mas que algo de errado eu estou fazendo? Eu só quero trabalhar para levar o sustento para minha família.
Que outros tipos de problemas que vocês enfrentam na rua?
Então, a gente não tem banheiro, né? Mulher, né? Nós precisamos de banheiro, a gente não tem horário de banheiro, a gente não tem horário de almoço, principalmente quem não tem autorização. É pior ainda, porque não pode deixar sua barraca ali montada, porque tem que estar correndo o tempo todo da guarda municipal.
Você já sofreu agressão física, você mesma, né?
Eu sofri agressão. Em 2003, meu filho nasce, 18 dias após o meu parto, eu fui agredida pela guarda municipal, a guarda quebrou meu nariz, me machucou muito, eu fiquei muito machucada. Após ter tido um parto cesariana, ligaduras de trompas, eu estava muito fragilizada, né? E eu fui agredida pela guarda municipal. Então, é uma guarda muito truculenta e tem uma gana muito grande em cima dos trabalhadores, né? A guarda municipal e os camelôs é igual água e óleo, eles não se misturam. Então, tem uma rixa muito grande, a guarda em cima dos trabalhadores.
Então, Maria, você, ao longo desses anos, organiza entre os trabalhadores informais, você já se candidatou à Câmara Municipal?
Foi muito bom, foi gostoso, a campanha foi maravilhosa, a gente fez um debate muito grande na cidade, Eu acho que serei candidata de novo, porque a gente precisa fazer esse discurso. Eu acho que a gente está num momento que a gente precisa ter representante nosso nesses espaços, né? Porque, por mais que as pessoas que estejam lá falam da gente, mas as pessoas não vivem o que a gente vive, não sabem o que é apanhar de guarda, perder mercadoria, trabalhar na chuva. É importante, independentemente de você ganhar a eleição ou não, você está fazendo o debate. Olha, eu sempre falei, se eu tivesse ganhado a eleição, né? A eleição foi num domingo, na segunda-feira, se eu tivesse ganhado, eu estaria arrastando o meu carrinho para me montar minha barraca. Eu não posso perder a minha barraca, perder o meu espaço de trabalho, porque senão eu perco a minha identidade, né? Perder a minha identidade de coordenadora de um movimento. Então, não posso perder isso. Eu tenho o maior prazer de fazer o que eu faço e meu trabalho, para mim, é muito importante.
Tá certo. Maria, muito obrigado, hein? Sucesso.
De nada.
Around the world, the challenge of ensuring that informal workers are recognized as workers with the necessary rights and protections that they deserve is acute. Our global economy is increasingly propelled by informal workers. Many of the goods and services we buy are outsourced to the most exploited workers on the most precarious contracts. Informal workers now make up around 60% of the world's workforce. Up next, we'll hear more about those challenges from Sonia George, a labor organizer in India.
I'm Sonia George, representing SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association in India, one of the biggest trade unions in the country organizing women workers in the informal sector. SEWA is one of the national centers in the country and also a member of the International Trade Union Confederation. SEWA has been organizing women workers in the informal sector for the last 50 years in different trades like domestic work, home-based work, street vending, fish workers, traditional workers, agricultural workers, and other trades where the workers are not at all organized. SEWA has been in the forefront of the struggles of bringing voices of the informal sector workers in the country to the mainstream labor discourse. SEWA has played a significant role in bringing policy measures and also legal support for the workers in the informal sector. Pandemic has affected the lives and livelihood of the informal sector workers in the country. Majority of the workers in the country have lost their livelihoods and there was no income compensation or social security support either from the state or from the employers. It's high time that the state should find measures to include these workers as a recognized workforce and enable them as contributors to the economy and thereby introducing effective social security measures and other income support measures to the informal sector workers in the country. Thank you.
Well, Sadia, it's great to see you again after so long. Great to be having this conversation with you and to be thinking together about these issues which are of such fundamental importance.
Hi, Guy. Great to see you too, and an honor to be with you on this very, very important panel.
I think many of us are confronted or taking part in conversations about what the world of work is going to look like post-pandemic, if we can think at least conceptually in terms of a post-pandemic moment, and how that will be different from the world of work as we went into the pandemic. And many of us believe, I'm one of those, that recovery does not mean simply getting back to where we started from. It doesn't simply mean returning to the pre-pandemic status quo. It's going to be, whether we like it or not, different. And hopefully, and if we act in the appropriate manner, it's going to be different in better ways. But one thing is, we've learned a lot about, can I use a simple phrase, the real value of labor and the value, the contribution of society of certain sectors of the workforce. And those we have come to refer to as essential or key workers, I think stand front and center in that consideration. I think the world of work was divided between those who could adapt to the circumstances of the pandemic. They could work from home, they could work remotely, they could do their jobs in a very different way than they normally did. And those who just had to show resilience, not adaptation, resilience, they just had to carry on doing their jobs very much in the way they always had done, okay, with protective measures in place, with social distancing and the rest, but these people just had to grit their teeth and carry on. So I think that one of the lessons that we do need to learn from this pandemic is to try, let me put it in simple terms, to address the terms and conditions, the return to labor of these people, to make it commensurate with the value that they contribute to our societies.
Thank you. Maybe let me jump in and pick up on one of your points there about the various debates that are happening across the space around work. What we will aim to do at the World Economic Forum is deploy some of our insights and analysis to first revaluing essential work and ensure that we put out there more of that forward-oriented thinking and insights that can support better decision-making beyond specific markets, but more globally. A second element is do more in the space of care work. There has been some fantastic studies from the ITUC, from the ILO, and at the same time, the situation has completely changed for a lot of care workers at the present time and since the pandemic unfolded. So putting out more information around that. And similarly, third, for platform workers, especially as there begins to be more digitization around essential work. So that's on the insight side of things. And then in addition, a large part of our commitment to what we call the reskilling revolution, which is aiming to support better education, better skills, and better work for 1 billion workers by 2030. A portion of that in every single one of the countries that we will be working in, and in every single one of the industries that we're currently working in, a portion of that will be deliberately geared towards essential workers. And that's exactly why we'll be going ahead with some of those insight pieces to ensure that we're looking at this in a sector-specific manner. So I'll stop there, but that is some of the work that is happening at the World Economic Forum. And again, congratulations to the summit for bringing together so many of the right voices on these conversations.
Yeah, perhaps Sadia, I can just pick up on a couple of points that you've raised, which I think are really, really important. You've made the point about skills and education. And undoubtedly, I mean, this is at the center of anybody's agenda. It was front and center before the pandemic happened. I think we all recognize in a world of work which is changing, was in transformational change pre-pandemic. Skills and reskilling, lifelong learning has become the buzzword, is absolutely crucial. I think there is a danger, and again, it can take us back to the lessons to be learned from the pandemic, to believe that skilling and upskilling is something at the higher end of the labour market, that there is, if you like, at the lower end, low skill or almost skill-free areas of work, where this agenda really doesn't apply. And I think that's really a mistake. I think we have to make this an inclusive agenda, not just at the top end, but throughout the labour market. So I want to agree very much on that. And we have other instruments. I mean, I'm not going to surprise you by what I say. No, we have minimum wage policies around the world, which are beginning to make a bit of a comeback, I have to say. People are beginning to talk about minimum wages as a most obvious and very important way of raising the floor at the bottom end of labour markets. And by the same token, collective bargaining is clearly the other way of determining wages that can bring us to more satisfactory and equitable outcomes. And we see the Biden administration trying to strengthen organizational and bargaining rights. So maybe there is a political wind blowing in the right direction. I could say something similar about the Charter of European Social Rights in the European Union and the action plan around that. But here's my point. This is not just something that needs to be left to the natural forces of labour market dynamics post-pandemic and in the recovery process. These need to be the objects of conscious public policy debate and action. And this is something where certainly the ILO hopes to play its role.
Thank you, Guy. And just building off of your point there, it is most certainly about building back better, but it's also about building back broader. And that's going to require a lot of proactive, conscious efforts on the parts of governments, as you said. And I remain very hopeful that this large intersection that we have between essential workers and informality, informal certainly need not mean invisible in today's day and age, not with the amount of data that we have and the ability that we do have to surface all of this information. So social registries can be improved, and therefore social insurance schemes can also become much more targeted, much more precise, and actually reach the right people and reach them for the right amount of time. That's another element where we hope to be able to contribute more and bring some of the right private sector actors to the table to help provide more support, more innovation, and more technology for some of these basic improvements that need to be made on the public sector side.
Well, Sadia, as always, thank you very much. That was a great conversation. Lots of stimulating ideas and plenty of issues for us all to work on together in the future.
Thank you, Guy. Wonderful to be here with you. And thank you to the summit for having us in this conversation.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Guillermo Giraldo, presidente nacional de la Unión General de Trabajadores Informales, UGTI, adscrito a la Central Unitaria de Trabajadores CUT. Nuestro sindicato lo que busca es la estabilidad de los puestos de trabajo de los venteros informales, que hemos sido por demás muy perseguidos, muy estigmatizados por parte de las administraciones municipales. Siempre hemos velado y hemos buscado los derechos, el derecho al trabajo, el derecho al mínimo vital, la confianza legítima. Ser ventero es un arte, no cualquiera es ventero. Somos personas que trabajamos el día para comer la noche. Buscamos ahora la unidad del gremio. Son muchas las organizaciones o asociaciones que representan los venteros informales, pero lastimosamente cada quien por su lado. Y las administraciones han aplicado el de divide para reinar. En esto lo que busca la Unión General de Trabajadores es la unidad del gremio, que tratemos de unir fuerzas en torno al sindicato para poder tener mayor interlocución con la administración municipal. Es por esto el sentir y lo que queremos con el sindicato y con las demás organizaciones, tratar de unir para poder tener una mayor capacidad de negociación con las diferentes administraciones.
Hi, I'm Ambassador Catherine Tai, and I am the U.S. Trade Representative. First, I'd like to thank all of the essential workers who are here today. President Biden has been clear that trade policy must cut everyone in on the deal, and that includes you, the workers who have been essential in keeping our economy running through a pandemic. We can't have a worker-centered trade policy without having a seat at the table for all of our workers. That means we need to hear from you. We are committed to protecting your rights, not just in times of crisis, but also in times of recovery and in times of prosperity. You can count on us to fight for enforceable labor standards in our trade agreements, especially in low-wage industries where workers are most likely to be exploited. This is an economic issue and a moral issue. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm excited to get to work. Thank you so much for everything that you do, and thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Dr. Musam Tumele, a public sector healthcare worker operating out of South Africa. And did you know that street vendors, waste pickers, as well as home healthcare workers account for about 62% of the informal economy? And I stand with this no longer invisible workforce.
B4IG is gathering about 50 of the largest multinational companies in the world, totaling sales of about $1 trillion and more than 3 million employees around the world, and of course many, many more in our supply chains. we created this coalition where the CEOs of all these companies sit around the board with the support of partners such as ILO, ITUC, and a number of others, multilaterals, to help us put together more inclusive growth models within our operations and in our ecosystems. So it was a major step for us after the crisis of 2020 to realize that so many more marginalized workers, migrants, women, very vulnerable people also in the informal economy would be hit by the pandemic more than others. And this is why, as a board, we have unanimously decided to support the notion of living wage. In June of this year, a few months ago, we've decided that living wage would become the standard over time in our own operations, and that we would call for action, corporations, to join the Living Wage Initiative launched by IDH. I hope that our efforts, with many others, will support the fact that the growing inequalities that we had seen already within the OECD countries, within the G7 countries, and of course, way beyond that, that have been exacerbated by the crisis, will gradually disappear in order to support and continue to support the development of a more resilient economies and more democratic world. Thank you.
Top Manta, a collective of mostly African, migrant, and undocumented workers in Barcelona, Spain, isn't waiting for the business community to change. They've designed their own line of sustainably sourced sneakers. They're determined to change the rules of the game.
Top Manta es una marca social, una marca solidaria, una marca resistente. Top Manta es una marca que defiende los valores éticos de producción y de comercialización. Top Manta es una marca que lucha por la inclusión de las personas migrantes excluidos de todo el sistema laboral y social. Top Manta es una marca que lucha por los derechos humanos, que lucha contra el racismo y la homofobia.
Believe in yourself. If you want it, go and take it. Faster, higher, stronger. Run, jump, follow your dreams. Just do it.
La vida no es como un anuncio de zapatillas. Sabemos que la carrera tiene trampas. No vinimos solamente en busca de una vida digna para nosotros y para los nuestros. Vinimos a cambiar las reglas del juego, hacerlas más justas para todos, porque no solamente se trata de hacerlo, sino de hacerlo bien.
Well, we certainly learned during the pandemic that we are all reliant upon essential workers. And we know that businesses that put humanity at the heart of their operations fared better. Yet, we still suffer from a crisis of conformity in business leadership, and everybody kind of looks and feels alike. And we cannot see or solve the great challenges we're facing, from the pandemic to the climate crisis to the fast accelerating inequality in the world, or the low trust in our democracies, or the challenges we're facing in Afghanistan and more places around the world where human rights are under attack and where rollbacks in women's rights are a reality, by having more of the same around the decision-making table. So at the B Team, we believe we have to change who to change how we lead and do business. And we believe workers need a seat at the table, and frankly, all stakeholders. Otherwise, we can't shift how we do things, and we can't innovate and lead the transformation that is needed to deliver shared prosperity on a healthy planet. And so our vision is that we don't think about leadership anymore looking the same or coming from only above, but that we bring together all stakeholders to truly deliver, co-create, and help us come from this moment of complex interdependent challenges to a future with an inclusive economy where we enjoy shared prosperity on a healthy planet.
Hi, I'm Sonam Kalra, singer and creator of the Sufi Gospel Project. Since the pandemic began, so many have clapped for our essential workers, and some have listened to them. But now we must all hear them. They make up more than 60% of the global workforce, and what they need must be at the heart of a global recovery. They are raising their voices. Let's all respond in unison, with a commitment to enabling them to thrive.
बोल के लब आजाद हैं तेरे, बोल ज़बान अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जा अब तक तेरी है, बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल ज़बान अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जा अब तक तेरी है, देख के आहंगर की दुकान में तुंद है शोले, सुर्ख है आहन, खुलने लगे कुफलों के दहाने, फैला हर एक जंजीर का दामन, बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल ज़बान तक तेरी है, एक आवाज़ है हम, बोलो एक आवाज़ है हम, बोलो एक आवाज़ है हम, बोलो एक आवाज़ है हम, एक आवाज़ है हम, बोलो एक आवाज़ है हम।
Throughout the summit, we've heard about what it takes to create worker-focused policies to help all of us build forward from this ongoing pandemic. And as we heard from Haldor Thomasdottir, it's time to rethink how corporations do business. Sharon Burrow and her guests are here to do just that.
Hello, and welcome to the final panel of the symposium, Essential for Recovery. With me are Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, and Lauren Compere, Managing Director of Shareholder Engagement at Boston Common Asset Management. Welcome. To start off, we're going to talk about why should essential workers be given an opportunity to have a say in the conditions at their company. How is that applied within your own organization, and what should international policymakers consider when it comes to worker equity post-pandemic?
Greetings, everybody. There can be no doubt that essential workers have to be valued, they have to be recognized, and they have to actually be granted decent work. These workers, the majority of whom are women, make up the essential services, whether it's health, education, childcare, aged care, retail, hospitality, all of the areas that keep our society going. We saw their value during COVID-19 when they went to work while we stayed home in order to protect lives. But they are indeed amongst the lowest paid, and many of them, I'm distressed to tell you, are informal workers. They have no rights, no minimum wages, no rule of law, no social protection. So we know what has to be done. We have to give a minimum living wage to all essential workers. We have to afford them collective bargaining rights, and we have to put in place universal social protection in safe workplaces. That's the mission of the ITUC and our affiliates, trade unions around the world.
Great. Lauren, do you want to tell me a little bit more about how you can see these kinds of policy changes implemented within, your investors and within your own organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Boston Common Asset Management itself is a woman-led and majority employee-owned firm. And we've also had a B Corp certification since 2016. So the types of things that Sharon is highlighting are the types of corporate practices we ourselves espouse. As investors, we also have a seat at the table asking companies the difficult questions, including how they treat workers. I think for us, COVID was a wake-up call, not just to companies, but governments and investors on how vulnerable economies are and the need to refocus away from short-term, unsustainable, and inequitable corporate practices to those that are protecting workers, especially essential workers.
So let me say to Lauren, thank you for the dignity of the advocacy and the inclusion that you present from an investor. If all investors indeed held that set of values and all companies held that set of values, we would have societies that weren't fractured with the despair of not being able to earn a living wage or to go to work safely or to feel valued with a dignity of work that is central to, a secure and optimistic lives.
Well, for starters, I think everyone needs access to vaccinations and treatments. And I think here in the US, but also in the global South and developing countries where many of the supply chains are for many multinationals. We need to have government support the acceleration of knowledge and technology transfer and distribution of COVID vaccines to the developing world. And there needs to be transparency and accountability for the pharmaceutical companies that are entering bilateral government agreements, potentially at the expense of having COVID vaccines accessible in the developing world.
Can I just say that Lauren is absolutely correct. The scandal of vaccine distribution, when essential workers ought to be first in the queue everywhere, because they're indeed saving the lives of the rest of us, whether it's in service or whether it's in health, then we are absolutely distressed that the profits being made by pharmaceutical companies in a pandemic where our economies, our workplaces reopening to allow people to earn decent wages, to actually go to work safely, is being denied for the quest of profit. We must not let this happen again, because the next pandemic will occur And if you can't produce through technology and knowledge sharing in hubs around the world, then no one is safe. Until we're all safe, no one is safe.
And, when it comes to what these policies actually look like on the ground, what can we expect when it comes to what workers and, labor organizations on the international stage are going to be asking for?
I can tell you that more than 50 companies have now committed to a minimum living wage. We see the numbers growing every day, and they're working with trade unions to make sure that they can track that for both their direct employees and the employees in their supply chains. We are also seeing now partnerships grow between some companies and indeed trade unions to identify risk, to make sure that the grievance procedures are there at all levels, right up to the headquarters of the companies in multinational corporations, and that you can effect remedy and then monitor the health of those supply chains. That is optimistic. You're also seeing, in the case of the EU, that there was a huge group of businesses supporting mandated due diligence from a group called the Business for Inclusive Growth Coalition. That's a game changer. If business sees that they need a level playing field so that there is indeed support, analysis of risk, and the elements of decent work that make up Goal 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals around full employment and decent work, we're starting to travel a different route. But I have to tell you, Lauren's right, we need many more of these commitments, but we also need governments to mandate responsible business behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely, Sharon. I think it's important that groups of companies are coming together around these commitments, but we need many, many more to join. And as investors, we want to make sure that their commitments result in real action. And so, the increasing accountability of the companies, whether it's through government mandated disclosure or actions. I think 50 companies is great, but there are 1,000 more.
So, Lauren, I want to thank you. The values that you actually exposed in the most concrete ways are so important. As an investor with an influence in terms of the demands you make on companies to provide decent work, I know that you make a difference. So I want to issue an invitation. Let's continue in partnership to expand the justice and the understanding across all investors, but also let's work together to make sure we grow that list of companies who deserve investment because they value decent work, they give their workers a seat at the table. And indeed, I just want to say I've really enjoyed discussing all these issues with you. Essential workers actually keep our lives possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. I think it's really important to work collaboratively with others, including trade associations, and I think it would be really fruitful to have a partnership going forward. And you're right, we need to vastly, exponentially expand the number of companies who espouse these kinds of values and are investing in workers in supply chains and raising up the livelihoods of their workers.
Hi, I'm Tom Perriello from the Open Society Foundations, and like you, I have been so inspired these last 3 days to be part of this first ever global summit on essential workers. It has been both inspiring and tragic to watch over these pandemic years the incredible impact and contribution of essential workers in our families, our communities, and our countries, but also the terrible conditions in which so many of these brave men and women continue to work, whether it's in Bessemer, Alabama, or nursing homes in Poland, whether it's the stories from the street vendors in Brazil. We know that these brave men and women are essential to our everyday lives, but it's important that our support for them not just take the form of a hashtag, but supporting actual collective action, the organizing that centers their voices, that helps build global solidarity, as well as national solidarity, and pushes for real policy change. We know, and I know from having been an activist, an organizer, a politician, and a diplomat, that one thing is true across every sector. Progress never happens without power, and power doesn't happen without access. It is long past time for essential workers to have access to corporate leaders, to policymakers in their communities and at the level of the UN. It's important for them to have access to all of us, and that we in turn that into action together. We have had such a great time working with our amazing partners on this project: the Women in Informal Employment Globalizing and Organizing, StreetNet International, HomeNet International, the Solidarity Center of the AFL-CIO, the International Domestic Workers Federation, the International Trade Union Confederation, and the Uni Global Union. It is so important to us and all of our partners that you remember these stories that we've heard from essential workers, and that you take this not just to heart, but to the streets, that you help us in organizing for change collectively across the world. And as Doris Krauss-Mays, one of my mentors, always says, solidarity forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to the essential workers of the world.